Hey there, and thanks for stopping by the channel. My name is Matt Marrash. Normally on Fridays we talk about things large format. Well, I've got some news that's large, but not in format. That's this stuff right here. This is new Harman Phoenix, a 200 speed color negative C41 process film from a very, very familiar manufacturer. There's no two ways around it. This is a film that is completely experimental in nature. Harman let me know that in their little opening letter that acknowledges that this is a limited run, pretty experimental film. So that means it's not going to look like the pinnacle of color negative films brought to you by Kodak and Fujifilm. This stuff is definitely set back a few decades. In fact, it even looks like it's been sitting around for a few decades, but we'll get to that later. In order to shoot this stuff, I had to dig around and find what little of my remaining 35mm gear I had, and I didn't want to like rent out something super special for this because they didn't really pay me to do this. They sent me 2 rolls of film. I had to shoot, process, do this video, but the reason I'm doing it is because I care about you having a good experience when working with this film. So I got out a pretty relatable camera, one of the most common student cameras ever made, the Pentax K1000. In their welcome letter, Harman kept mentioning that this is an experimental film with high contrast and high grain, which tells me this is a film that has a pretty low dynamic range. I didn't know how low, so I wanted to make sure I had each shot count. So knowing that, I loaded up my Pentax K1000, clunkily might I add, because it's been a while, but it was a nice excuse to go out, and it was really relieving to work handheld. But I needed some subject matter, and for the late fall weather, I took Lore and our new dog, Echo. Echo is a beautiful little Borzoi puppy. Yes, she's a puppy. She's got a little bit to grow. She just turned 1 year old, and she was super excited to get out on the trail over at Antrim Park. While we were walking around, I had my Reveni incident meter with me, and this was crucial to making sure I was working within the confines of the limited dynamic range. And here's how I thought it went. Oh. Those aren't. Can't even really put this to a good montage to put a nice spin on it. Holy crap. Those do not look good. Part of the instructions about this were if you're going to send this film out to a lab and not process it yourself, you had to send it to very specific places in both the UK and the US. In the US, that meant sending the film out to the darkroom lab. The folks out in St. Clemente, I've talked about them before, they're really nice. Getting the lab scans is exactly why the film looks the way it does. If you're sending this film to a lab, your lab's normal calibrated for color negative scanners, they're not gonna cut it. The film base for this is really, really funky. You might have noticed when I was loading this, the film base did not look like any other film base you've seen before. In fact, it looked like this greenish yellow when I was loading it. And that's because the actual base for this film, once it's processed, is purple. It's got like this fuchsia, purple, magenta-ish look to it, and that is not standard. Lab scanners are pre-calibrated to color negative films with the orange masking layer. That orange may shift to magenta depending on what film, but it's certainly not going to be purple. So what those scanners are going to do to compensate for that is they're just going to tank the contrast until things look right. And that's exactly what the auto scans over at the darkroom did. So I'm not blaming anyone, it was just an automated part of the system. But I do kind of want to point this out to Harman because if they just would have sent me the data sheet, I would have known exactly what I was getting into. Fortunately, just before shooting this video, I had a chance to take a look at the actual data sheet that Harman is providing today with that film, and it shows you need some pretty hefty compensation with working with auto type scanners. Now, for those of you that are processing your own film and scanning your own film at home with something like an Epson or other flatbed scanner, you're not going to have as much of an issue. The film will correct pretty easily. I scanned on my Epson scanner in both the non-correction profile as well as the general auto-correction C41 profile, and it turned out infinitely better than what I received from the auto scans from the darkroom. So all of this to say, if you're shooting this film and you're gonna send it to a lab, make sure that lab knows exactly what this is, and maybe even point them to this video or to the data sheet in the description below so they know what they're getting into. So once I started correcting for that really funky film base that was going on, the shots weren't too bad. There was a few where I genuinely missed focus, and that's on me. In fact, some of the B-roll I even missed focus. I was not having a great day. 35 is hard. I'm used to having a loop where I can just magnify and everything's great. Yes, it's experimental. It is a contrasty film. When you hear someone say it's a contrasty film, that means it's gonna take the normal range that we are perceiving and it's gonna stretch it out more. The dark areas are gonna go darker and the light areas are gonna go even lighter. Following the little shoot that I did out in Antrim Park with Lore and Echo, I wanted to do my second roll in a slightly more controlled environment. This was following my results from the first roll sent to the darkroom. So I knew it was contrasty, I knew it was grainy, and I knew the color cast was definitely funky, and there was even a bit of halation going on there. Now I wanted to see how this film would perform in a very controlled environment. So I called up my buddy Tariq Terry, we went over to his studio, and we set up the lighting in a very particular manner. If you want to learn more about lighting, I'm going to put a link to a previous video that Tariq and I did. It's a whole half hour on getting to know lighting for film photography. It's a complete start to finish. Anyway, the way we metered our light in the studio was we wanted the overall exposure to be about f5.6.5, and then the accent light that was coming in from camera left to be only a half stop over at f8. In any other ordinary scene shooting with modern color negative films or even digital, this is pretty flat and pretty boring. You'd have to crank the contrast slider and do some silly things to make it look more exaggerated in contrast than it is. But Harman Phoenix, well, take a look for yourself. Those are not the results that you would normally see when you only have a half stop difference between a highlight and kind of the middle tone of your shot. You would normally have just a very flat, gray, generally boring looking shot. These were anything but. So I brought out a little test pattern that I used to calibrate my spot meter, and even the highlights were starting to halate or kind of blow out in the shot. These are really contrasty results. This tells me that Harman Phoenix has a dynamic range between 3 and 4 stops in any given moment. It was funky, it was weird. So those results are saying everything Harman did say out loud. This is a contrasty, random grained, low dynamic range film. It's crunchy, it's grindy, it's pretty low resolution, and I'm guessing the look is gonna be polarizing. But it has some unique quirks. There's no other film on the market I know that is fresh and looks like that. So if you're somebody that enjoys expired films or likes that experimental look, this is gonna be a film that's incredibly up your alley. This is a limited run of film, meaning that the film that I shot might not even be the same film that you shoot. You might have a better version. And if you're watching this much later, that Phoenix 200 might be better and better and better. This is a good thing. This is incremental steps forward with an industry that really hasn't innovated in 20, 30 years. The very pinnacle of film photography that we have is based on motion picture emulsions that came out in the late 2000s. Heck, there might even be people watching this video that were born between when film photography kind of peaked and now. This represents a chance at the market crawling forward, pouring money into R&D and getting new films into excited customers' hands. This is a really good thing. If you were somebody that followed really closely along with the Impossible project during the 2010s, you watched them go from ugh kind of film to okay, I can see the vision, to oh wow, this is pretty good, to oh my gosh, this is Polaroid. This is kind of the same trajectory. This is kind of how I see where Harman Phoenix could go. Overall, I'm pretty conflicted when it comes to Harman 200. On one hand, I'm not really happy about the hype and the larger marketing campaign leading up to it. I just kind of want the film. On the other side of things, it's really cool to see a major manufacturer tackling this huge challenge that is coming up with a new color emulsion from scratch. And if you're someone that values a unique color palette and something that is truly experimental in nature and overall pushing the industry in the right direction, this is a film to check out. But one thing I am really pleased about is that Harman waited so long to roll it out, because the rollout means if you're watching this video, the film is available right now at major retailers worldwide. But there is one place I would recommend you get it, and that's by heading to filmphotographystore.com. Yes, that's my buddies over at the FPP. I've been hanging out with them for over 14 years talking about all things film, and right now is no different. If you head over to filmphotographystore.com and use code LFF, that's going to save you an additional $1 on each roll of Harman Phoenix 200 that you order. Coupon code is good through December 15th and not available to combine with other offers. So check that out, links in the description below. I only shot 2 rolls of this stuff, but if you have questions, I'll do my best to tackle them in the comments. I still have a lot to learn about this stuff. Hopefully it's gonna get better from here. And if you have any long form questions, you can feel free to hit me up, sprocketquestions@gmail.com. I wanna thank you again for stopping by, and we'll catch you here pretty soon on the channel.